Hi folks, our Okuma MB4000. It has been absolutely great. When we got it, the Fusion Post honestly mostly worked out of the box, but we did have to make a few modifications, and we actually covered those in another video on modifying posts. And it's actually super rewarding these days as a machinist to have some comfort level making basic post processor modifications. But I hit a roadblock on a probing issue, which kind of scared me, and I really wanted to get this to work. So I asked Phil, who is literally a professional post developer, if he would come on and do a video showing how he would tackle this. But to try to keep it genuine, because I'm curious to see how Phil approaches this. He hasn't seen this issue yet. We're kind of doing this live. I'm going to show him what the issue is. I just sent him the file, so he has a local copy. And we're not going to put him on the spot. We'll edit this video for the sake of time, most likely, but I want him to see the issue, and maybe I'll laugh if this ends up being super easy to fix, but I wasn't comfortable fixing it, so here we are. So this is one of our Modvice top jaws shown on a fixture here. We make 4 on this right side, and then we actually have 4 on the left side that have to be a separate setup because they're mirrored, and Fusion doesn't handle the patterning well that way. We're trying to maintain a critical datum between the two faces. And so after we come in and face the part, we're then probing this back edge. And that's a really cool thing. In theory, it should be perfect, but the probe is able to either update that or check it if you want to run it as a probing validation. And then we're able to come in with the side of an end mill, machine that very edge. But this part is not ever sitting perfectly flat in the fixture. So I want to be able to use a probe angle, one of the Fusion in-process probing things, to update in the Okuma world. It's called a G11, the Haas world it's G68, and I think Fanuc has a similar convention as well, where it's able to do a coordinate shift rotation for maybe a few thousandths of an inch or even less of that angularity to make that perfect feature. And if I just run this one snippet of code, you'll see it'll come in, it'll probe just the x-axis, and then it'll come in and it'll probe those 2 points. And when I post it with just one offset, it works totally fine. Not only in the post, but if I actually run the code on the machine, it literally works fine. The problem is I don't want to run just one. I want to use the Fusion multiple instances to post this to 4 different offsets, 30, 31, 32, 33. And when I change this to 4 and hit OK and post that, I get an error, and if I pop open the error, it shows up a couple different errors, but work offset cannot change while using angle rotation compensation. And as a layman, this is telling me, for sure I'm aware that machines get real fussy about doing things like home moves, or obviously in this case work coordinate changes, when it thinks it's in that angle setting. So I'm going to stop talking there and turn it over to Phil.
So yeah, I just opening your file now. Perfect. It does say kind of in that post log that it can't probe with the rotation on, which would make sense, like you were saying, if it was in a G68 or if it was actually rotating. But since we don't have any angles here, I don't see why that would be an issue. It is selected, like creating an angle, but I think what the log was saying is that it can't do this while it's in an actual rotation. So there's something going on between posting it with just one work offset or posting it with many. For some reason, it thinks that with multiple offsets, it's rotating. Or that's what I'm getting before we've even gotten into the code. But the first thing I like to do when I'm going through post issues, especially when there's only a couple of toolpaths, is just grab those 3. I'm going to post these to the special VS Code Fusion extension kind of post instead of posting it with yours. And that way I can actually just open these up as a template in VS Code. So I'm just going to come up and I'm going to immediately post these just as they are to Fusion should have this built in, but if you don't have it, you can look it up on their on the post library. It's export the CNC file to the Visual Studio Code. This creates a little template inside VS Code that we can open, and I'll kind of show you that. So the first thing I do is when I come up with an issue is just post it like that. It should automatically open VS Code. It gives me just a little file saying, yes, this was successful. So I can just close that. So now I do have your post open. And if anyone's not really familiar with, or if you're not familiar with editing posts, Fusion has this amazing extension in VS Code that you can download that actually gives you all the function lists, all these little template files. So you can actually post out all of like test code within VS Code instead of going back into Fusion, posting it out, kind of reading through it, going back into here, making a post change, and then going back to Fusion. You can at least do everything in templates here and see a little basic.
And when I first learned about this a year or two ago, I found it to be incredible. And it's not complicated to set up, but it was worth, like everything, I make a video, not only for everybody who's watching, but frankly for myself to remember how to do it. So we'll put a card in the description to the page where we show not only how to install VS Code, but then how to install some of the plugins that can help it really be a pretty incredible tool for modifying posts.
Oh yeah, this is awesome. I love this. And being in a kind of a code format, you feel super nerdy as you're editing everything. I feel smarter than I actually am sometimes.
That's what it's all about.
So I have your post open now. Over in our little CNC selector, I'm going to come down to custom. I'm just going to refresh this. And we do have that 6001. That was the program that we just posted. So that was the 3 toolpaths. And if I just click on that, it's going to automatically kind of generate the same log file that you got. So we can come down and see this issue. So I get the same one, WCS offset cannot change while using angle rotation compensation. Now what's nice is it also gives us the line numbers in the post that's actually failed on. So we can actually kind of come into our post, search for this line number, and see exactly where this failed. And then we can start kind of going back through, looking at the functions, and kind of dissecting the issues. So I see there's an error at line 2035. So I'm going to do Control G so I can search for line numbers. I'm going to look up 2035. Just hit enter. Oh, I should actually be on this side. Control G 2035. Okay. 2035, here we are. So now I can actually see exactly where that error message came up. Oh. So the first thing I like to do is see what function this whole system is in. So we're kind of working our way up until we see a little line that says function and then the argument. So we have function set probe angle. So we know that this is everything to do with set probe angle is controlling, or wherever set probe angle is called up, this is kind of the part that is basically going to be shown. So we know that we have an issue here. We're going to start kind of working our way back up and kind of seeing what everything is kind of talking about, like why is this error even coming up? So we can kind of go through and look through these like if sections that are just above, and anything that's in this little curly brackets is going to be run. As we're down on this line and I can see what the error is, if I jump up to the line right before it, it's telling me if the section that this probe is output on is not, or the work offset for the section that this probe is on is not equal to the current work offset. So if this was working on a G55, or posting out to a G55, and that's not actually equal to the current work offset that we're using, then it's going to throw this alarm. Which
that's all it is?
Yeah, so it looks like it's not actually, it has to do with the rotation, like we kind of would gather from the error. It's saying, is the new work offset not equal to the current work offset? Which makes sense when you post it with only one work offset, it posts fine. But if you're posting it in kind of a pattern format with a work offset shift, it's now saying, no, the second time I post, I'm probing this, that work offset's not the same as the setup work offset. So I'm throwing an alarm here.
Got it.
Which, if you don't know how to read the if get section I and kind of looking through these, that gets a little bit confusing. And especially with the errors saying there's an angle rotation, but this error is actually not coming up with an angle rotation. So if we go a little bit further, we kind of know why we're getting this error. Now is how do we get rid of it? And what sections we need to look at to see why is this being called up if we're not actually in an angle. So if I come up a little bit further, I get this little line. If validate work offset is true, basically, if it doesn't have a little exclamation point in front of validate work offset, it means if this value is true. If it had an exclamation, it'd be like, is this value false? Mm-hmm. So we know, just kind of looking at this, if whatever validate work offset value is true, then run all the code that's within these two curly brackets, which just so happens to be our error. So if we come up a little bit further to see where validate work offset is being called or being set, then we might get a little bit more information onto why this is being run. So the best thing to do is just highlight that all. And look, we got a bunch right in front of us. Perfect. So we know that if this is true, run this code. And we have 3 highlighted here. We say the first one right above, that's setting it to true. If we come up here, that's also setting it to true. And then one up here, that's setting it to false. So now we kind of like look through this section. Why is these being set true? Well, we have all these little cases here, switches and cases. They're kind of saying, if a certain method is being called up, then run this code. If it's not, if it's a different method, run this code. And that's kind of where we're seeing here. So, if we're using a G68 mode, then we can run this stuff. If we're using axis rot, which I'm not entirely sure, if it must be some sort of a Okuma thing, then run this code. So we can kind of go through and see. So we know if we're in G68 or axis rot, then we'll validate the works offset, which would run this code. Yeah. So let's kind of see what mode we're in. So I'm going to come up and basically highlight set probe angle so I can see where this function is being called. And then we're going to see if there's any switches being turned on so we know which one we're running. So I'm just going to highlight that, Control F, and I'm just going to cycle through up to the top. Set probe angle, there's nothing called into there. Nothing called in. Okay, so here's one I just found. Set probe angles turned on, we're calling it up, but we're only calling this up if the probe variables in the angle method set to 68. So I'm going to guess that there's going to be a post property that is setting switch between 68 and axis rod. So I'm going to come down to, actually I'll just search to the very top. And kind of scroll through our post properties and see if there's one that's switching the post arguments between, or the probe between 68 and axis. I'm scrolling through, which I do not see anything in the post property. Right. No, nothing. Okay. So other than post properties, there's a section right underneath that has a bunch of variables. And in these variables, a lot of other functions are turned on and off. They're just not user editable from Fusion. They're just built into the post.
The post properties are the things that you actually see when you click post in Fusion, and it gives you the choice of turning them on and off with radio buttons or checkboxes.
Yeah, exactly. So everything you see in the NC program on the right-hand side, that's kind of where you can control post variables and outputs straight from within Fusion. But some of these variables are built into the post, and they're meant for nerds like me to go in and change things. So I'm just going to go through. I don't see anything other than coming up to the one that just randomly had to be highlighted here. G rotation modal, pre-modal, func. If probe variables, probe angle method is equals G68. Okay. So I haven't seen anything that actually sets this to the probe variables to G68, but we're going to actually search up the probe variables, probe angle method. Again, it's a whole lot of highlighting and searching to find exactly the section of the post you want. So section down. Okay, validate. That's not setting, this isn't setting anything, it's just kind of confirming. Going through again. There we go. So this is kind of a funny little one to see. This probe variables, this is the one that we were kind of searching for. This is what was tied to calling it G68 down here.
Okay.
Now, so we're trying to figure out where this was being set, basically. And it just so happens to be right here. This is saying the probe variables dot probe angle method is equal to, and then in this little section, this is kind of like a question that the post is asking. It's saying if the machine configuration plus the get number of axes is less than 5 or it's a 3D, question marks. This is the actual question it's asking. If whatever is in here is true, then set it to the first number. If it's false, then it's unsupported. So it looks like we're currently ours set to 68. So that means we would be running pretty much this section of code, which I know it's a lot to think about and there's a lot of stuff going on, but at least we kind of know that this is the section that's being run, the one that is turning this validate work offset to be true. So technically, if we didn't validate this, if we said that is, don't validate, basically we're saying, or commenting out the section where we set this to true.
Yeah.
So when it comes down here and reads if validate work offset is true, run this code, this should theoretically not allow this to run anymore. So if I just say Control S, we should see hopefully a different error, which we do.
Ah,
perfect.
Okay.
So now we have another problem to solve. You cannot probe while G11 rotation is in effect.
But it shouldn't be in effect.
But it shouldn't be in effect, right? And again, we get another little error, line 3155. So I'm going to jump back on this side. Control G, 3155. And we look for that one, 3155. That does not look like where that's being called up.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so let's go down. Validate false, you cannot probe all. 3154. Okay. So if we can't find the error at the actual line, I'm just going to highlight the error here. And I'm just going to say Control C. I'm going to come into this window, Control F, Control V that in so I can see it. And basically, we just searched for that whole error. And I can see there's only one time it gets called up. So that kind of makes it easy. So now let's see what's going on here. We're currently in the on section. If you kind of notice, Fusion's got all these functions. Like we just went through a probe angled function. Fusion has got a bunch, but some of the most important ones are ones you'll see called on open and on section.
Okay.
And you can also see them at the top here. See at the very top, you see our post, what post we have open, and then what section we're actually on.
I've never noticed that. That's great.
Yeah, so it's really handy when you're like trying to figure out where in the kind of post this is being run and why it's being run. If it's on open, that means that's as soon as the program's first started, it runs everything that's in the on open section and then never runs it again. If it's in the on section, section, it runs it every time there's kind of a new toolpath. And that's kind of the flow. So
yeah, on section is almost like a cam operation, like a 2D contour or face, right?
yeah, exactly. So we're coming down here. We're in the on section. Now it's saying if it's a probe operation, which is perfect, it is, then we want to validate this again. So probe values, if it's not equal to G68, then you can't run this. But we thought we were in G68. So
what should be okay?
So one real quick thing to see if this solves it is if we just take where it gives us an error, and let's just comment that out.
How did you comment 4 lines at once?
So that is fun little keyboard shortcut. If you highlight all the lines you want and you say Control and backslash or forward slash, I can never remember, then it automatically comments out everything.
Man, that's worth it alone for that tip.
I think there's also Control Shift A or something like that. Alt Shift A. Yeah.
That does the okay.
Yeah, the keyboard shortcut Alt Shift A gives you the little backslash star section, which you'd see a lot. I think it's referenced in the actual post manual. But the VS Code kind of keyboard shortcut is Control backslash or forward slash. Then it just comments every single line. So if we comment that out, let's see if we get any more errors. Control S to save so it regenerates. And look at that.
No way.
We got some code going. So
I could hug you if this works.
So we know we got code running. Now, is it actually going to run the machine? I'm not sure, but...
Well, so that was, again, kind of like my layman's frustration was it should probe the angle. When it probes the angle, it would turn on G11. That would let it work in that shifted plane mode to cut the 2D contour, and then it should turn it off, which means it should be fine to do things like move to a new coordinate system or probe. Like, I know you can't activate a probe and run probing cycles when you're already in a G11, but it shouldn't be. So I think as a layman, it should be easy to look through this to make sure it's applying the G11 and then turning it off before it moves on, right?
You should, yeah. So let's go through. So we'll keep this commented out for now, just so we can actually run through the code and see where the lines are coming. And then we'll come back and kind of see if there is an actual proper way for us to go about changing this instead of just telling it to forget it all and then having an issue down the line. But an easy way to make sure we don't lose ourselves is let's just do a little comment and say to do, all in caps. That's just an easy way. I can go back into my search and I can just search to do, and I can come back and see where in the post I've changed.
One thing, I'm not sure why it's doing this, Phil, but we can't, the way the code looks like it's posted is it's doing all the probing at once, and then it's going to do the cutting at the end. That doesn't work here because it reuses the variable 84. So we'll have to probe offset 30, cut it, and then probe offset 31, and then cut it. So you might need to repost the code to not have it consolidate those tool paths.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That is a good thing to know. But at least for now, we should have this open probe. Yeah, right, because it might not turn off the G11, as you were saying. Now, that's something where I don't know much about the Okuma side, so I'm not sure how G11 actually gets turned off. Did say get called up.
It's just a G10, though. But it shouldn't even be calling it up, because it's all just... Scroll down to find the 2D contours. That's where it should actually... There we go.
Okay, yeah, so it's G11. And then, yeah, G10 at the bottom to call it. Yeah. Okay, so it is posting tool by tool, or path by path kind of thing. It's not going the exact sequence we want. Okay, so that looks like we have to jump back into Fusion and change the way we're going about posting this out. I am going to go right back to Fusion quickly. I don't believe under Edit, under our setup, we can... Oh.
Yeah.
Order by tool. So we should go order by operation, or preserve order.
Preserve order would be the...
Okay.
I think I would leave it.
Preserve order. Okay.
For the record, we still would have had this error. Preserve order wouldn't have solved this post issue.
Correct. Actually, I mean, you never know. Let's see if we can try it out. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I am going to post to my export CNC file to Visual Studio. I'm going to change the name, though, to preserve order. Hopefully I spelt that right. Okay, and that kicks us right back into VS Code, which is nice. Our file's successful, so I have to move that out of the way, close that out. I'm going to close out our debug. And we'll start from the very beginning again, because I always find the best way to problem solve is kind of remove all the variables. So start from the basics. We made a couple of changes. Let's remove those changes.
Oh,
and see if that actually does post out the way we'd think it would, or if it is still going to give us an error. Okay, so we did the validate. Now we want to also go back to, I'll search through the functions again. Accept probe angle. I think that's where we were. Or was it a little bit further down? Where was our validate? There we go, validate. So I'm going right back to where we started. Saving. I'm going to refresh our little CNC selector so I get that new file, preserve order. And we still get the code. Okay, perfect. That's good to know. So let's go back up. Maybe we don't have to remove the validate. Let's go back up to to do and just do one section at a time. Let's comment this out so we don't get the error. Control S. And let's see how it goes. Okay. So it's still asking us to validate. So we can go back and change that. Let's just comment that out and try one more time. Okay, now we're getting our code again. And that looks better. First probe, second probe for the angle. Turns on G11. Turns off G11.
55. That's perfect. I'm not, the lines 90 and 91, block skipped here, programs only for you. That's just a VS Code thing. So we're saying, hey, this isn't good machine G code. We're just debugging. Yeah.
So in VS Code, because we're just kind of going through and debugging stuff, we want to see where the sections are. A lot of this, the regular G01 moves, like the XYZ kind of values, are all their own section. This is what Fusion just outputs.
Yeah.
And what we do on our post side is we're really making sure that we want to know, one, yes, what are the codes right, but are the sections between the codes, are all the linking moves going to be right? Are the tool calls going to be right? We know that Fusion is going to output our XYZ moves correctly. We don't know if the linking between those moves is going to be correct. So there's a setting in VS Code that just turns off, it just limits the amount of lines that it can produce, and it just gives you this.
Oh, that's great.
It helps a lot, so I'm not scrolling through a 1,000-line program trying to find the one piece.
Yeah, right.
And the one really good thing about this plugin is I can just come up, find that G11 line that we were talking about, and just click on it, and it jumps to that section in the post. So
this is why I was scared. We've made some post edits before, but I always worry that we'll do something, especially on this one, where it's like, no, you're fundamentally changing how the machine handles probing. Something I just like, well, don't screw up a really great machine. I just wasn't comfortable, is the short answer.
Yeah, exactly. And it is kind of terrifying to make little edits like this because, it might work on our sample program, but then, 3 months down the line, you might do something a little bit more complicated. And, oh, okay, that line you commented out was actually needed for this one time that you need it. And suddenly you're crashing the machine. So I'm a big believer in not just taking codes out or blocking perfect, like the one line of code you need for this one example, just hard coding it in. I'm a big believer in logic. So making sure the logic's actually right is what is going to save you a lot of trouble down the line. At this point, I would recommend testing the code, making sure it's outputting exactly how we would want it to. And then after we know it runs on the machine, come back and start looking at that logic on, is there something else that needs to be changed that's a little bit more solid than just removing lines?
Okay.
And there's a million tips and tricks to dive into Post for all sorts of really cool and fun things. So lots more stuff to do.
Yeah, we have, we'll put a link in the description. We have some really good basic post editing videos and resources over on nyccnc.com. But for folks that actually need real post help or formal post development, Phil, will you mention what you're up to these days?
Yeah, so most people might know me from Instagram, the Dr. Phil Experience. I did run a motorcycle shop a while back, but now I am fully with Team DSI, a little good Autodesk reseller. And my job now is kind of a pretend machinist. Went from being a real machinist to a pretend machinist, and now I'm just a code nerd.
One major disclaimer that I want to make after having given a rough edit to this video is, number one, I put Phil kind of on the spot to ask him to help us solve a post processor error. Just commenting out errors doesn't necessarily give you good results now, or especially in the future. So I want to make that absolutely clear that this is not necessarily the right way to tackle any post correction, and that really the better way to handle this thing ongoing would be to either have your own knowledge or hire somebody like Phil. That's not the point of this video, but nevertheless hire a proper post person to go through and truly look at why was this code in there from the first place and what's the right way to fix it long term. Because there's one reason why I do what I do. It's sharing knowledge and empowering folks to make parts, but that comes with the caveat of also succeeding. And succeeding does not mean making post changes that can cause future part failures or machine crashes. Seriously, this really matters. So it's for sure a balance. I'd like to see more folks have the capability, the comfort to either modify their post or at least know kind of what and where to ask. But seriously, there are some real safety concerns and part quality issue questions around this sort of a thing. So take that for what you will. As always though, folks, thank you for watching. I love what I get to do. If you're watching it still this far into a post processor video, you rock. Otherwise, take care. See you soon.